Hello there, you're watching the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the Evening Standard columnist Ayesha Hazarika and The Sun's political editor Tom Newton-Dunn. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, The Guardian's top story says trade unions and business organisations across Britain and Europe are joining forces to demand more pace and urgency around Brexit negotiations. Brexit also leads the Daily Telegraph. It reports that another cabinet war is brewing after the business secretary urged industry leaders to use their influence to soften Brexit. Meanwhile, the Defence Secretary is preparing to ask for a £4 billion boost for the Armed Forces budget. That's according to the Times front page. While the Eye says that Cabinet Minister's public squabbling over tax is damaging the Tories' election chances. He's not smiling now. The Metro leads with the guilty verdict for terrorist Khalid Ali, who was planning a deadly attack outside the Houses of Parliament. The Financial Times reports on plans by the US technology giant General Electric to simplify its structure by spinning off its healthcare and oil divisions. The Express features a photo of Prince William laying a wreath to remember victims of the Holocaust while on his historic visit to Israel. The Daily Star reports on the human toll of the ongoing hot weather. And with me tonight, Ayesha Hazarika and Tom Newton-Dunn to take us through their selection of newspapers. Good evening to you.
Good evening.
Hello. Welcome. We're starting with the Telegraph. The Tories rowing. Shock horror.
Who'd have thought it? They don't do that, do they? Yeah, and guess what? It's about Brexit. And we haven't heard that before either.
No.
Surprises all right.
Indeed.
This is a particularly tasty row, though. We've had a fair few over the...
Why is this so tasty? Why is this one so tasty?
So this really comes down to the very defining character of the Conservative Party, which we always thought for some 150 years or so of its lifetime was pro-business. It was the party of entrepreneurs, of capitalism, and of making a bit of money and growing the cake so everybody benefits. Until recently, when business came head-on into direct confrontation with some in the Conservative Party's view of how Brexit should be delivered. And it turned out what business wanted, and it should be said at this stage, established, well-entrenched and quite big business, their view of the world, which is basically, we're doing quite well at the moment, let's not change it too much. Clashed pretty heavily with the likes of Boris Johnson, who said infamously last week, expletive business. Clearly, we won't repeat. Not even this late at night, we won't repeat that.
No, not at all.
And others, like the Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, who said on the television over the weekend, the sort of alarmist warnings by companies like Airbus, they're going to lose vast amounts of trade if we stop trading frictionlessly with the European Union. There's no big customs deal to be done. That this is highly alarmist and in fact, pretty negative and indeed treacherous towards the Prime Minister's negotiations. So you have this extraordinary clashing now with business. Greg Clark enters stage left today as Business Secretary himself, very pro-EU, unashamedly so, and really the mouse of Cabinet. Quiet man, very modest man, not really known to say boo to a goose too often, has made the most extraordinary speech today in which he positively egged on business to carry on making these sorts of warnings, despite what his Cabinet colleagues have said to the total contrary and opposite of that. And then he used the most extraordinary phrase that, and I quote, evidence before ideology is what business do, and that's what we need. Accusing directly his fellow members of the Cabinet of being ideologues.
No, the infighting is out in the open. I mean, we've seen the Prime Minister reassuring or trying to reassure business, which is not something you'd ever think you'd have to see coming from a Conservative Prime Minister.
Absolutely. There are sort of sacred cows in both the big parties. For the Labour Party, it's the NHS. For the Conservatives, it's business. So it's absolutely extraordinary that the rows about Brexit now threaten the absolute heart and mission of the Conservative Party. I mean, to give you an idea, this would be like somebody from the Labour Party standing up and saying, well, isn't the NHS all terrible? Don't believe doctors, don't trust the NHS. I mean, this is really kind of fundamental stuff, and it just shows you how difficult the whole Brexit negotiations are. I think the person that's going to be interesting to watch in all of this is Sajid Javid. He was the former business secretary, now the Home Secretary. He will have, he has an important role in that sort of very small group, that kind of the Brexit war cabinet, war being the appropriate kind of term for that. He, remember, had a big row with Theresa May when he was in the Department of Business over taking student numbers out of the immigration figure. So it's going to be interesting to see if he will sort of back Greg Clark, because businesses are very, very worried about skills. They're worried, particularly those high-end businesses, those really kind of knowledge economy businesses, a lot of businesses in science, aerospace, that kind of thing. They need to get really skilled workers in. So immigration and visas are going to be a really, really big issue for them. Also, to be fair to them, the certainty is killing them. They don't really have a party position on Brexit, but businesses need to be able to plan. And this lack of certainty is causing major, major problems. And it is not good enough for people like Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt to sort of say, look, just forget about what business thinks. But at the end of the day, it'll be the people of this country who are affected if jobs start going to the wall.
I think what I originally said was, and I do have sympathies for both sides of this argument, because big business, who we are hearing from, we don't hear from SMEs and small traders in this argument very much. We hear from businesses who are very well established, and the status quo has worked very nicely for many years. Most of the people who voted to leave in the referendum 2 years ago came to their conclusion, and quite largely, especially down the lower end of the socio-economic scale, is because the status quo really wasn't working too well for them. Where Airbus and BMW might be getting rich, their pay had not increased in 10 years. So there is a clash of cultures going on now between sort of, those who profit from the status quo and those who quite clearly haven't. And the argument of the Tory party is, who do they need to represent? And they are schizophrenic on this. They really can't work out and make up their minds.
That argument is cited a lot, and it does work on some levels, but everyone who works in these big manufacturing bases are not kind of, their mouths are not stuffed with gold. Often it's people on the shop floor.
They employ tens of thousands of people.
Yeah, and the supply chain as well is affected.
That's true.
So it's not true to say that everybody that's going to be, that the only people who are arguing for the status quo are the sort of fat cats in the pinstripe suits, the guardians of the status quo. Also, there was, a couple of weeks ago, I was really struck by the number of small businesses that were starting to speak out, haulage companies, that type of thing. They're saying, actually, without some kind of certainty on the customs union and how they're going to get around, this is going to really affect their business. They're not fat cat businessmen.
Yes, I was going to say, we haven't heard much from SMEs, have we? And their voice hasn't been as vocal. Let's look at another Tory row. This time it's in the eye, and this time it's over tax.
A related but slightly different Tory row, which is, there is actually a common theme in all this, and we should also say that, of course, all the Brexit sabre-rattling now is because of this huge moment in the Brexit cabinet coming at the end of next week, when the entire cabinet go down to Chequers for a final showdown to once and for all come to a position of what we're going to ask for from the EU, allegedly.
Feels like we've been
they'll probably fudge it again, but then that's how we're billing it.
These away days they're never good.
That's what we think is happening. Anyway, Liz Truss, who is the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, made a speech today in which she attacked, by my count, 3 different cabinet ministers, quite openly. First to say, to really attack the Prime Minister and Philip Hammond for the NHS 20 billion last week, in which he said, why are we talking about raising taxes? That's not what we do as a Conservative Party. We reduce taxes, and if we want to put more money into public services, then we need to, increase tax receipts, and the way you do that is by encouraging growth, by allowing people to keep more of the money, etc. She also went on to attack a few others, including Defence Secretary Gavin Williamson for being unmacho rather than macho by demanding more money for his department. She thinks it's more macho to manage with less, if you can follow that argument. And best of all, she had a pop at Michael Gove, the Environment Secretary, who's about the only person doing anything in government at the moment apart from Brexit, passing a huge amounts of different laws, banning pretty much everything he can think of to save the planet, which she also said was thoroughly un-Tory. We shouldn't be telling people what to do. And she made this extraordinary joke about, it's not a Tory thing to do to ban wood-burning goves. Wood-burning stoves. Calling out.
See what she did there.
But whether you agree with Michael Gove banning everything he can find or not, it is still government policy, which you've just had another member of the Cabinet attacking.
Quite brazen attack on her part, don't you think? Are you surprised by that?
But you know what? Nothing surprises me now about the Cabinet. I think we need to accept that sort of the normal protocols of a functioning cabinet have completely gone. You know, you have ministers crossing the line every single day. There would be a time...
Sometimes twice a day.
Yeah, sometimes twice an hour. I mean, there would be a time when things mattered. So, for example, the whipping system, where if the government of the day put a 3-line whip, everyone was expected to vote, particularly people in the cabinet, or they would lose their jobs. Now, Boris Johnson gets to sort of, you know, pop up on Love Island or something like that to sort of avoid, you know, the vote. You have Gavin Williamson completely briefing left, right and centre. You know, what you really see now is the beauty parade, and I use that word very ironically, the beauty parade beginning for who is going to take over from Theresa May. And everyone is starting to put a little flag in the ground. I think Liz Truss's intervention today is saying, you know, here, you want an Iron Lady? Look at me. And she's actually been much more... Liz Truss went from a sort of slight figure of sort of fun character. She was... there were lots of kind of memes about her on Twitter and things like that for some things she'd said, cheese, and pork markets and British cheese being superb and all that sort of thing. But actually, she's quite effectively sort of pushed back on that, and she's kind of coming up as quite a sort of feisty figure. So I think she will be one to watch. But I'll tell you something, the jockeying is well and truly beginning.
Because the authority has broken down from the centre. Everyone thinks Theresa has less than a year to survive, and, you know, that's what happens. A vacuum of power is filled.
Nature abhors a vacuum.
You can keep talking. After the break. Much more coming up after the break. Do stay with us. Don't go anywhere.
This little glass of mine,
I'm gonna let it shine.
This little plate of mine,
I'm gonna let it shine. This little ball of mine.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me this evening, Ayesha Hazarika and Tom Newton-Dunn, still taking us through their selection of the newspapers. We're going to have a look at the Financial Times now, and this is the Uber ruling that came through today. They have their licence back in London, but are under these probationary rules for 15 months.
Yeah, I mean, this Uber saga's been going on now really since the autumn of last year, when TfL rejected their licence on really grounds of safety. There were allegations and indeed findings that there had been serious sexual assaults on women which had not been reported to the police, and it was deemed that Uber was not a fit and proper company to be operating a licence. So this obviously was a huge, huge deal for Uber. London is Uber's biggest European market, and so all the stops were pulled out. Uber has now been put on probation. It's been granted a licence for 15 months. They've done a couple of things. They've installed 3 new non-executive directors. They've changed the way they do their background checks on their drivers, and they have agreed a system with the Metropolitan Police of, if something bad happens, reporting it quickly and swiftly. So they're on a 15-month probation, but I suspect in the long term this will be sort of good news.
So you think that they've done enough, effectively?
I think they will probably have done enough, but there will be a lot of media attention and a lot of vigilance. But what will be interesting to see how the black cab companies react to this, because a lot of the trade unions as well, and of course the Mayor of London was very, very critical as well of Uber.
And he thinks he's been vindicated because they still are on this 15 months probation, and he thinks they've really pulled their socks up.
Yeah, and he will think that that was because of what he did, and there's some truth in that.
But there was also a fair amount of controversy why TfL, which is in effect run by Sadiq Khan, acted in the first place. Uber did have a problem with safety in the back of the cabs for female passengers, without a doubt. But there was also a large pressure group with, you know, some trade unions and black cab drivers in particular, who were having their trade deprived of them by Uber. And Uber is a little like Facebook or Google, one of these giant, hugely successful tech disruptor firms who were brilliant, and everyone got a cheap ride literally out of to begin with. And suddenly you wake up one morning and they've swamped the entire market. They're a huge monopoly. You can't get a cab on London streets quite late at night now unless you get an Uber. And I was going through the stage of calling an Uber. You'd have to call 2 or 3. The guys wouldn't turn up, and their service noticeably failed, at which Uber weren't going to do a thing about it because They own monopolies. So,
But isn't it
you
just
see
a
that
free market, though? Because
it is
flat
for
taxes,
well, it is-
they use
it is-
apps now as well, don't they?
They do, and there's a very good one we can't publicise that I would direct everyone to if they possibly could, because they're now beginning to compete quite nicely. But what do politicians do? You know, how can you get in the way of what is a very successful, good company playing by all the rules of capitalism, which is, however, so successful they are now soon becoming a monopoly. There are no rules in the book for you to throw at them.
And people want to.
Well, this is the
use
whole
them.
thing about advancing capitalism. But the other issue that I think Uber is going to have to look at with a lot of these big new tech companies like Deliveroo and all these other things is workers' rights, because there is an argument, and some of the trade unions have been taking some cases which have been quite successful, saying actually the drivers and these employees are employees. They are deemed in many ways to almost be employees, and they should be offered some sort of protection.
Let's round up with the weather. Hottest day still to come. Can
what a
you bear it,
scorcher.
Ayesha?
I am absolutely dying, I have to say. Having been born and raised in Glasgow, I literally am melting.
You're not used
it's
to these
so hot
times.
today. I watched this poor cat literally trying to shave itself. It was so hot. It was just like, make it stop. I don't think the UK is just equipped for this type of weather. I know this is so ridiculous. It's been like 2 days of heat.
It is ridiculous.
It's not equipped
Carry
though.
on.
It's not equipped. Like even like the trains are saying that like the trains can't run because it's too hot.
So we spend our lives moaning about the cold and the rain and the weather, and we have 1.5 hot days.
And we can't be
suddenly the
grateful.
nation has it, and we start moaning,
I agree with you,
complaining.
Tom.
Bring it on.
Tom and
33
Ayesha,
degrees tomorrow. Hooray.
Thank you so much for the moment. Enjoy the weather while it lasts. We'll see you a little later for some more papers. Let's have a look at that weather for you now.